That day, the dog sat on the edge of the sidewalk as the world hurried past him, a small shape swallowed by noise, shoes, engines, and indifference. People glanced, then looked away. Some pretended not to see him at all. His fur was dull, his body still, his eyes carrying a quiet weight that made most humans uncomfortable. It was easier to ignore him than to wonder why he was there, or how long he had been waiting. And so the hours passed, unnoticed, as if his existence didn't quite belong to anyone anymore. What no one realized was that this dog wasn't simply resting. He was waiting with a patience that only those who have lost everything seem to possess. Each passing shadow stirred a fragile hope in his chest, only for it to fade again when the footsteps moved on. Hunger pulled at his body, but loneliness pressed harder. Dogs feel time differently, and every ignored moment stretched longer than the last, carving silence into his heart. From the outside, it looked like nothing was happening. But inside that small, tired body, memories echoed. A warm hand once rubbed behind his ears. A voice once called his name with joy. A place once felt like home. Those memories kept him there, refusing to let him leave, as if staying meant there was still a chance that someone, somewhere, would remember him too. Then, just as the light began to change and the day threatened to end like all the others, one person slowed down. Not out of pity, not out of obligation, but because something about the dog's stillness felt wrong. Their eyes met his, and in that brief moment, everything shifted. The dog didn't bark. He didn't beg. He simply looked back, as if saying more with silence than words ever could. That single moment, so small it could have been missed, became the turning point of his entire life. Because when someone finally chose to truly see him, not as a problem or a burden, but as a soul waiting to be acknowledged, something extraordinary began to unfold. And what happened next would prove that even the most ignored hearts can change everything once they are finally seen. The person who stopped did not rush. That alone was different. They stood there for a moment, long enough for the noise of the street to soften, long enough for the dog to lift his head just a little. Years of instinct told him not to expect much. Hope, when repeated too often, can hurt more than hunger. Yet something in the stillness of this stranger felt unfamiliar, like a pause in a world that never paused for him before. The dog's body was tense, not from aggression, but from uncertainty. His tail didn't wag. His ears didn't perk up. He had learned that excitement often led to disappointment. Instead, he watched quietly, measuring the distance between himself and another broken promise. Dogs remember patterns, and his past had taught him that people usually came close only to walk away again. The stranger knelt, not reaching out, not invading his space. That choice mattered more than words ever could. For the first time that day, the dog felt no pressure to perform, no need to beg or prove his worth. He was allowed to simply exist. And in that permission, something inside him loosened, just slightly. A soft sound escaped his throat, not quite a whine, not quite a breath. It was the sound of recognition, of one living being acknowledging another. Dogs communicate through energy long before touch, and the dog sensed that this person wasn't there to judge his scars, his dirt, or his exhaustion. They were there to understand. Minutes passed like this, suspended between fear and possibility. The street continued its rhythm around them, unaware that a quiet connection was forming on the concrete. For the dog, this moment felt heavier than hours of waiting. Because when someone chooses to stay, even briefly, it challenges everything a forgotten heart believes about the world. When the person finally moved closer, the dog didn't flinch. That alone surprised him. His muscles, usually ready to pull back, remained still. A gentle hand hovered in the air, waiting for permission rather than demanding trust. Dogs notice these details. To them, respect feels like safety. The dog leaned forward just enough for his nose to brush the stranger's fingers. That single touch carried more meaning than food or shelter ever could. It was confirmation that he was real, that his presence mattered. His breath steadied, and for the first time in a long while, his eyes softened instead of searching for an escape. As the stranger spoke quietly, the dog didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Dogs are fluent in emotion. The voice carried calm, not urgency. Care, not pity. It reminded him of nights long ago, when fear didn't live in his chest and sleep came easily. Memories stirred, not painfully this time, but warmly. The dog shifted his weight, sitting instead of standing. It was a small act of trust, yet monumental for a soul shaped by abandonment. Sitting meant he wasn't ready to run. It meant he was choosing presence over survival. And in that choice, the invisible wall between them began to fall. Around them, people continued to pass, unaware that something rare was happening. Not a rescue yet, not a miracle, but the fragile beginning of one. The dog didn't know where this moment would lead. He only knew that for the first time that day, he was no longer invisible. The dog allowed himself to lie down, curling slightly at the stranger's feet. This wasn't exhaustion alone, it was surrender. Dogs do not rest near humans unless something inside them feels safe enough to let go. His breathing slowed, uneven at first, then gradually steadier, as if his body was finally catching up to a feeling it had almost forgotten. The stranger noticed the scars then, not just the ones on his skin, but the deeper ones that showed in the way he reacted to sudden sounds, the way his eyes flickered at raised voices nearby. These were not the marks of a careless animal. They were the quiet evidence of a life shaped by loss, by doors closing, by hands that never came back. Time passed differently now. What had once dragged painfully began to move gently, almost kindly. The dog's mind drifted between the present and fragments of the past. A bowl placed on the floor, a name spoken with affection, a tail wag that once came easily. Those memories no longer hurt as sharply. They hovered like distant lights, reminding him of who he had been before being forgotten. The stranger placed a small amount of food nearby, not pushing it toward him. The dog waited. Trust, once broken, grows back slowly. When he finally ate, each bite felt like more than nourishment. It felt like permission to stay alive without fear, if only for a few minutes longer. As he finished, he looked up again, meeting the stranger's eyes. This time, his gaze held something new. Not desperation, not confusion, but a fragile curiosity about what might come next. For a dog who had learned to expect nothing, curiosity itself was a quiet victory. The decision did not come with drama. There was no sudden declaration, no grand gesture. Instead, it arrived softly, like a thought that had been waiting for the right moment. The stranger reached into their pocket and pulled out a worn leash, and used but carried for reasons even they hadn't fully understood until now. The dog watched carefully. His body tensed again, memories flickering of being restrained, pulled, or left behind. But the leash was placed on the ground, not forced upon him. Choice was offered once more. Dogs recognize freedom even in small acts, and this one mattered. Slowly the dog stood. His movements were cautious, deliberate. He sniffed the leash, then looked back at the stranger. There was a question in his eyes, one formed not by language but by instinct. Is this the end of waiting, or just another goodbye? When the leash was finally clipped, it felt different from before. It wasn't heavy. It didn't pull. It simply rested there, connecting them without pressure. The dog didn't resist. Instead, he took a single step forward on his own, testing the bond, testing the promise behind it. In that step, years of neglect loosened their grip. The sidewalk that had been his entire world moments earlier began to fade behind him. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he was no longer going alone. Walking beside the stranger felt unfamiliar, almost unreal. The dog matched the pace instinctively, though his steps were hesitant at first. Every sound made his ears twitch. Every sudden movement reminded him that safety could disappear without warning. Yet the leash remained loose, a quiet reassurance rather than a command. As they moved farther from the place where he had waited all day, the dog glanced back once. Not out of longing, but out of disbelief. That patch of concrete had held his loneliness, his hunger, his silence. Leaving it behind felt like shedding an old skin, one he had worn for far too long. Some dogs run from pain. Others endure it until something changes. The stranger paused near a small patch of grass. The dog lowered his head, sniffing deeply, as if reconnecting with the world through scent. Grass, earth, distant traces of other dogs. Life existed beyond waiting. His tail moved slightly, almost imperceptibly, but enough to signal something awakening inside him. With each step, his posture changed. Shoulders lifted, Head rose. The dog was still cautious, still guarded, but no longer collapsed inward. Stories of dogs often speak of instant transformation, yet real healing happens quietly, in moments so subtle they are almost missed. By the time they reached the corner, the dog was no longer following out of fear. He was choosing to walk beside someone. Choice, for a dog who had lost everything, was the beginning of dignity. The building they approached was simple, unremarkable to most eyes. To the dog, it carried unfamiliar smells layered with warmth and possibility. He paused at the entrance, uncertainty returning for a brief moment. Doors had closed on him before. Thresholds were dangerous places for forgotten souls. The stranger waited, saying nothing, allowing the dog to decide. After a few breaths, he crossed the threshold on his own. Inside, the sound softened. The air felt calmer. His paws rested on a surface that wasn't cold or hard, and his body responded before his mind could catch up. Water was placed nearby. He drank slowly, savoring each moment, as if afraid the bowl might vanish. Then came a blanket, gently set beside him. The dog circled once, then twice before settling down. His muscles relaxed in stages, releasing tension stored for years. As he lay there, his eyes followed the stranger's movements, alert but no longer fearful. Trust had not fully arrived, but it had begun to knock. Dogs don't need promises spoken aloud. They listen to consistency, to patience, to presence. The dog closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, as if making sure this moment was real. He didn't sleep yet. He simply rested in the quiet, suspended between who he had been and who he might become. In the quiet that followed, it became clear that this story was never only about a dog. It was about what happens when patience meets pain, when presence replaces indifference. The dog had not been saved by a dramatic act, but by something far rarer. Someone choosing to stop, to see, and to stay. Every moment before that had shaped him, but one moment of genuine attention reshaped his future. What this journey reveals is how deeply animals mirror the world we create for them. The dog did not ask for perfection, comfort, or certainty. He responded to calm, to respect, to being treated as a life that mattered. In doing so, he reminded us that healing does not arrive loudly. It enters quietly, through small choices repeated with care. There are countless dogs like him, sitting silently in plain sight, carrying stories no one has taken the time to hear. They are not broken. They are waiting. Waiting for a glance that lasts a little longer, for a pause in a hurried day, for someone willing to look beyond fur and circumstance and recognize a soul shaped by loyalty and loss. This story lingers because it asks an uncomfortable question. How many lives are changed, or left unchanged, by the moments we decide to ignore? Compassion is not always about grand gestures. Sometimes it is about noticing the overlooked, choosing empathy when it is easier to walk away, and understanding that attention itself can be an act of rescue. If this story stayed with you, it's because somewhere inside, you recognize its truth. Stories like this deserve to be shared, because they open eyes and soften hearts. If you want to see more moments that remind us of the quiet power of kindness, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement helps these stories reach others who might need the reminder just as much.